أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ويسألونك عن ذي القرنين قل سأتلو عليكم منه ذكرا Surah al-Kahfi, Surah number 18, ayat number 83. We are once again at a very critical juncture of the surah. That is because this verse number 83, marks the beginning of the fifth and the last story number 5. You can also say the history, and this story relates to the story of Zulkarnain al-Islam. We can actually read the verse and the translation. Wa and yes alunaka, they ask you. Sawal, they question you, so they ask you. An, about Dhil Qarnaini. Okay, the name is Dhul Qarnain, but why are we saying Dhil Qarnaini? Why is it in the jar status? That is because of the presence of the word an. That's a bit of the grammar. Those who are not able to follow through, not an issue. The story remains the same. About Dhul-Qarnain, I just explained why Dhul-Qarnain is referred to as Dhul-Qarnain in this verse. Dhul-Qarnaini, 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 right? Say, Qul, say. Sa'atlu, sa is in the future, so now. Now, atlu, I will recount, alaykum, unto you all. Minhu dhikran, naturally we'll translate dhikran first, a narrative, a mention. So a narrative is a better word over here, a narrative. Minhu, on part of his history, literally from him. What is anhu and minhu? About him would have been anhu, minhu is from him, means from him means what? From a part of the entire history. We are not going to narrate everything. From a part of from that history, a part of it is what we are going to narrate. So on part of him in the sense, about him in the sense his history. So the translation itself is very simple, it's not very complicated, and they ask you about Dhul-Qarnain. Say, I will now recount unto you a narrative on part of his history. And that's what we get in the story as well. As far as this discussion on this verse is concerned, then we could treat this as over and we could continue with the next sessions to discuss about the upcoming verses, verse number 84, 85, 86, and so on and so forth. But we'll pause and we'll reflect a little bit more, and I would like to share a bit of a background information, which I think I did probably towards the beginning of the surah, maybe in the introduction or maybe in between also. So that needs a little bit of refreshing, reminding, and so that helps. So basically, this was in response. If you find it strange, why does the verse start like this? And they ask you about Dhul-Qarnain, why does it start like this? That is the reason being that this was in response to the 3 questions which the Jews of Medina at that time sort of informed the Quraysh when they approached the Jews, that these are the 3 questions with which you can test the claim of the validity of the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there were 3 questions basically. The first question was, and ask him about what happened to the young men in ancient days, for there is a marvelous story about them. Very hazy way to frame the question, isn't it? This was the second question, and asked him about the mighty traveler who reached the confines of both the east and the west, who traveled to the 2 ends of the world, the east and the west. And the third question was, and ask him about the spirit, the ruh, what the spirit is, what the ruh is. So 2 of the answers, the 3 questions, 2 of the answers, responses to the first 2 questions is in this surah, in Surah Kahf. One is what we have already read. Am hasibta anna al-Kahfi wa rakimi kanu min ayatina ajaban? That ajaban word is there. Okay, marvelous story. And we have discussed that. That was in verse number 9. I mean, why the verses start like this is what I'm trying to give a background to and the context. And because they asked him about Dhul-Qarnain, without specifying whom they are asking about, they deliberately kept it hazy. And they ask you, so ask him about the mighty traveler who traveled to the 2 ends of the world, the east and the west, the confines of both the ends. I mean, there could have been so many mighty travelers who could have traveled in 2 directions, isn't it? which mighty traveler they had at the back of their mind. That was not clarified in the question. And look at the response. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have responded like this. وَيَسَلُونَكَ عَنْ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ, and they ask you about Zulkarnain alayhi salam. They ask about him. Okay. We again, Kul, say, Sa'atlu, I will now recount, alaykum, unto you, minhu dhikran, a narrative on part of his history. You try to confuse us, we'll keep you perennially confused. And we will enough details so that you can't deny that you know whom we are referring to or about. We'll give sufficient details. You want to refute? Do refute. So 1400 plus years have passed. We are asking the Jews of Medina, hey, is the answer what the Prophet ﷺ responded with? Is it true or false? Answer us with your answer. Why don't you answer? Why are you quiet? Because if that response would have been wrong from the Prophet ﷺ, that would have given them an opportunity to speak against him and expose the falsity of his prophethood, the claim that he was a prophet. But they have no response, which proves that Muhammad ﷺ is a true prophet. Otherwise, the specific agenda that they had was to expose that he's a false prophet. And he gave a response. The question they asked to test him, whether he's a true or false prophet, he responded to that. And if they had a counter argument against that response, they would have done that. And we have been waiting and waiting and waiting for more than 1400 plus years now. Do you have an answer? Can we hear a response, please? Okay. So that is part of the background discussion that we intended to have. And okay, the third question, not so much important. I mean, in a way, it's obviously important, but not in the context of Surah Kahf. That discussion comes about in Surah Isra, which happens to be a twin. I mean, the surahs of the Quran, the surah of the Quran, surah, I have explained the word before also, it's the plural of surah, appear in pairs. So chapter 17 and 18, they form a pair. Isra and Kahf, they form a pair. Okay. So in chapter 17, verse 85, again the same pattern. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ, and then the response proceeds. So this was the background. A few more discussions are necessary over here. First is Dhul Qarnayn, Dhu al-Qarnayni. We can potentially ask two questions. Who is Dhul Qarnayni? Who is the historical Dhul Qarnayn? Who is he? Is that a primary motive for us to answer that question now? I don't think so. Otherwise, the person was camouflaged in the question and the answer came in response with what you have on the screen, with the title, not with the name. And they knew whom it is in reference to, and that is sufficient for us. We can obviously have discussions. That is an academic pursuit, not so much a pursuit in as much as guidance is concerned. Surah Kahf, it's for guidance, specifically in Akhiruz Zaman, because the fitna of Dajjal is or will be manifest in Akhiruz Zaman. And we're trying to decode and decipher and put it in front of you so that it's easy for you to appreciate and understand that. Understand the wisdom, the guidance, the strategies even, and similar sort of things. So that question we'll put on hold. If we receive questions on the same, we can have a separate discussion, no harm done. The second, once you have a title, a sort of which acts as a proper noun, then you don't translate that, do you? You don't translate that. For example, any name which any person has, let's take the example of Prophet or Nabi Shoaib alayhi salam. I just took an example because my name was named after him, alayhi salam. So if we say Prophet Shoaib said to his people that something, That discussion itself is irrelevant to what we are trying to, to the overall discussion that we're having now. So we don't translate that, okay, Shoaib means the one who guides others to the right path, the one who shows and guides others to the right path. We don't say the one who guides and the one who shows the right path and guides others to them said such and such a thing. We don't do that. We don't translate proper names, whether it is name or whether it is a title given to that person. We don't do that. To even make an attempt exposes your foolishness. And when that translation is wrong, it exposes your what should I say, ignorance as well. Zulkarnain, the fools, have translated, those who have attempted to translate, they have translated it or mistranslated it. Whether the world considers them scholars or translators, I don't care, as the possessor of the two horns. Horn, you know, the Satan's horns, the symbolism. The possessor of the two horns. What nonsensical translation is that? You would say qarn, with a Qaf, qarn. Does it not, in the dictionary, does it not mean horn? I say it can mean horn. But whenever the word has been used in the Quran, in the Hadith, in the Islamic literature, unless further clarified, what does it refer to? What is it in reference to? And sure enough, we find a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ where we find the best generations are, the khairul qurun, the plural of Quran is qurun, the khairul qurun, the best of the generations are the first three. So this, according to me, is in reference to himself, the phase of prophethood, and then the people who were the companions and the Sahaba, and then the next generation, the people who were the Tabi'een, the successors to the companions. So prophet, companions, the prophet, companions, and the successors, the companions and the successors, the first three generations, according to me. According to some, it starts with Sahaba, Tabi'een, and Taba Tabi'een, but that's irrelevant to our discussion. So the word used over there is indicative of an age or a generation. And unless it is further specified or clarified that this word is in reference to qarn, horn, it is always in reference to age. So should that not be the standard default translation then? The possessor of the two ages, in the sense, the person, the man who impacts two ages. One age is the historical Zulkarnain, the historical figure of Zulkarnain, the historical man, the man in history who is referred to as, who is given the title of Zulkarnain, that person, because he had a profound impact in that age, as we read in this sort of, what should I say, a narrative, a history, a historical narrative. We loosely say this is a story, but it's actually a historical narrative. The focus is also not in history, by the way, the historical narrative with a focus on guidance. And we'll see how and why this is so profound, this story, as it unfolds. We'll see that. The man who impacts two ages. So because he was able to protect the people from the infiltration of the Gog and Magog people. So he had an impact in that age. And the other age is in Akhiru Zaman. How do we know that? If the fools challenge me, how do you know it is in Akhiru Zaman? Fool you are, you don't understand, you have the brain of a donkey, that this story, from nowhere, it appears in Suratul-Kahfi. For what reason? Because the understanding and the decoding of the story has a relation, a direct correlation to our understanding, and thereby guidance and strategy to protect ourselves from the fitna of the Dajjal. That's why. So this is the age, Akhiru Zaman, when the Gog and Magog, and why there was a fitna and fasad. Because the Gog and Magog were the perpetrators of fasad. Mufsiduna fil ard, as it is mentioned in the Quran. They create fasad, they are the perpetrators of fasad on the earth. And Zulkarnain al-Islam was able to protect the people, the masses, the human population from the fitna and fasad of the Gog and Magog races. Who are they? We'll discuss later. Not important at this point of time. And once again, they break loose from that wall. What will happen? The world will again witness the fitna and the fasad of the Gog and Magog people. And that is what is exactly happening now. If you don't know, you do some reading. It's preserved in a historical narratives, and we'll discuss all about that when the time is opportune, when the opportunity so comes. We'll discuss all of that. But I guess this is sufficient as an introduction to this historical narrative, and we'll proceed and see how the story unfolds. So because they come out and again recreate that era of perpetration of destruction on the earth, so that phase of the protection from Zulkarnain's act of creating the wall ends, and so he has an impact, or there are consequences that will manifest in Akhiruz Zaman. I think that is enough for a brief sort of historical context from different perspectives, and we'll obviously proceed with the entire narrative about story number 5, and I'm super excited to do that with you, to share that with you. And once again, the structure is clear, and I explained verse number 82 according to me should have been 3 separate verses. Don't argue on that unnecessarily. I've explained that. Go back and watch it in details from 79, 80, 81, 82 to get the full picture. If you're watching verse number 83 first, go back and watch those to understand and appreciate what I'm talking about. So if that happens, then the third part of verse number 82, which is according to me an ayah by itself, is the message. So that message is sandwiched between story number 4 and story number 5. I explained all of those. We'll just read it one more time now, so that we'll get the flow of how the story is being introduced to us. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنْ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ قُلْ سَأَتْلُو عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْهُ ذِكْرًا. And they ask you about Dhul Qarnayn. Say, I will now recount unto you a narrative on part of his history.